Hello and welcome to part 4 of the Mama You're Not Broken audiobook, written and read by me, Anna Cusack. This episode looks at invisibility. After being the centre of attention during pregnancy, most biological mothers get pushed aside after the birth as the baby becomes the star of the show. We talk birth injury, feeding, and how mothering and fathering a child are very different social roles, even in 2021. Enjoy. Before we start this chapter, I just want to remind you that you can order a physical copy of this book and also see a full reference list at www.annacusack.com.au/book. You can also head to that website to jump into my membership for either $35 Australian dollars a month standard price or $25 if you're experiencing financial pressure or identify as someone from a marginalised group. The membership is a subscription which gives you access to a monthly group workshop or online circle, 2 days of private voice message mentoring per month with me, and also includes an active allyship contribution to pay the people behind the diverse voices you'll be hearing from in season 3 of the podcast for their time and expertise. There are no lock-in contracts and you can sub in and out at any time. If you're not up for the whole membership deal but want to support the podcast and its guests, you can become a patron of the podcast for $5 a month. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 3, Invisibility. Never was my body the topic of conversation with near strangers so much as when I was heavily pregnant. How do you feel? Do you know if you're having a boy or a girl? You shouldn't be lifting that in your state. In A Woman is a Woman Until She is a Mother, Anna Prushinskaya writes that when you are pregnant, your body is everyone's property, but just days after giving birth, no one looking at you has any clue of what that body has just achieved. She is right. A pregnant belly often leads to congratulations being bestowed upon you, yet when that same body is bleeding and still wearing maternity clothes a few weeks after birth, it receives no such celebration. When I went out the first few times without my daughter, I felt like I needed a sign on my head flashing. A whole baby just grew from the nutrients in my blood. Please go gently on me. Alas, no one out in the big, wide world knew that I was now a mother, still learning what that word meant in practice rather than theory. I had become invisible. If I'm being brutally honest, the invisibility of mothers and what they need can happen during birth itself. Despite the benefits to mother and baby of upright birthing positions, over 2/3 of people who give birth vaginally in the US do so lying on their backs. The reclined lithotomy position, with feet in stirrups, is thought to have been invented for the convenience of medical practitioners to see what was going on down there and intervene as needed. Trouble is, more intervention is generally needed, as reclined and semi-reclined positions are highly unnatural positions to birth in and go against all natural gravity-assisted birthing and pain-relieving movement methods. While this birth position has fallen out of favour in some maternity wards, its hangovers have not. Power cords, monitoring leads, and drip lines are often too short to allow movement away from the bed, even in a birthing suite with otherwise plenty of room to move. Medical staff in delivery suites who talk about birthing women or their babies as if they are not there and treat women's bodies as objects to be manipulated in accordance with their preference and all-powerful policy are unfortunately a current reality for many women I speak with, not a bygone era. It breaks my heart that my dear friend left hospital feeling violated and not even human, her words, not mine, after her baby's birth. As laid plain in Birth Time, the documentary, her story is one that is played out all too frequently in obstetric units and maternity wards Australia-wide. The rampant hijacking of women's bodies during late pregnancy and birth means that physiologic birth is largely unseen in hospitals. The consequence is that staff perhaps don't know what an undisturbed birth even looks like, and certainly don't receive support from higher up to remove themselves from the process enough to let it happen. This is not a book about the failings of maternity systems, and I certainly do not wish to bash the professionals and practitioners who legitimately want to do their best for women and babies in the era of under-resourcing and red tape. Likewise, my critique will not attempt to outline the countless issues of a system that many health advocates, academics, and mothers agree requires dismantling and rebuilding from scratch, rather than patching over or improving upon. As the saying goes, you can't polish a turd. That said, this is a book about the emotions of motherhood, and it would be impossible to ignore the problems of maternal invisibility and violation during birth, and irresponsible to not pass comment on the apparent inconvenience that natural birth is to the patriarchal medical system. Birth trauma rates in Australia are through the roof. 1/3 of births are described by the mother as traumatic, either physically, psychologically, or both. Postnatal depression, anxiety, and PTSD among mothers who experience birth trauma is common. Fathers, non-birth parents, and health professionals witnessing birth also report symptoms of post-traumatic stress from exposure to birth trauma. Yet, who knows about this until they become pregnant? Nobody talks about their experience until you are a sitting duck to hear every woman and her dog's birthing horror stories. Even then, it is usually the gory bits that are shared, not the parts that you'd benefit from knowing about to have a better experience than the storyteller. Perhaps you or those around you have been on the receiving or giving end of a sentiment along the lines of, "Oh well, baby's here safely and that's all that matters." If a mum has previously lost their baby, they may believe this wholeheartedly and would willingly go through any amount of trauma if the outcome of holding a live baby in their arms was assured. For the majority of mothers, however, this line is problematic in its dismissal of the traumatic experience that birth in a broken system can be. Yes, the survival of the baby is paramount, but it is not the only thing about birth that matters. Invisibility extends outside of the delivery room and punctuates the early days of motherly life. Visitors may come to meet and hold the baby, asking how they're sleeping and feeding. The next question is often posed to dad. How long do you have off work? Who is there to meet the woman who is now a mother? To hold her, allow her to sleep or feed her? To ask how she feels about this new work, this new role she has stepped into overnight? While baby's health is under close watch by nurses and doctors, the same cannot be said about their mother's well-being. In my home state of New South Wales, babies are checked by a health professional at 2 weeks old, 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and 2 years old. Their reflexes, hips, hearing, and eyes are reviewed at each appointment. The attending parent, generally the mother, completes a checklist prior to each visit. Examples of these questions are, does your baby turn their head towards sound? Does your baby recognize familiar faces? And has your baby received breast milk since this time yesterday? After months of maternity care and support brochures flung at you from every angle, you are not the patient at these visits. You are merely baby's mum, the conduit to appointments, the answerer of questions, and the one to be rapped on the knuckles if your child isn't ticking all the developmental boxes. It's not unusual for mothers I speak with to report raising concerns about their child's health and be dismissed as paranoid. This is a particularly common complaint if it's her first baby, she is a young mother, non-white, or if English is not her first language. When these same mothers present to the casualty department in an emergency situation, they suddenly become an indispensable resource, the font of knowledge of what is and isn't normal for their babies. The most telling question at my daughter's many checkup appointments has always been, "Do you have any concerns about her?" No, I didn't, but there were times I had concerns about me that were never inquired about. Times when I was struggling to maintain my weight, to sleep, to laugh. I wasn't asked and I didn't tell. Just like all the other mums around me, I looked like I was coping. Just like all the other mums who do all the behind-the-scenes work to get their kids fed, nappies changed, dressed, nappy changed again, fed again, wrestled into car seats on a few hours of broken sleep to arrive at the earliest possible appointment so as not to wait too long in the waiting room disrupting others, I had become invisible. After signing out of the maternity care system within 2 weeks post-birth, mothers are pretty well ticked off as complete. A 6-week post-birth check with a GP is recommended, but you have to book it yourself, get there independently, and juggle the baby at the same time. In Australia, there is no standard referral for an internal check from a women's health physiotherapist at 12 weeks. This is despite the government's own health websites informing us that childbirth is the main cause of uterine prolapses, where the uterus starts descending into the vaginal cavity, and that these can worsen if left undiagnosed and untreated. There is no standard for emotional debrief about the nature of birth, nor scheduled lactation follow-up. Professional netballer Kimberly Smith sustained an ankle injury prior to leaving on an international trip as part of preparation for the national team's Commonwealth Games campaign in 2002. Living at the Australian Institute of Sport, she received twice-daily physiotherapy for a month and was given the best rehabilitation treatment the country had to offer, all costs covered by the Australian taxpayer. When she gave birth, it was a very different story. At 2 weeks postpartum, I felt like my insides were falling out, Kim recalls. I went back to the hospital where I gave birth and they said everything looked normal. Having spent thousands of dollars of personal funds on her rehabilitation, Kim has become an advocate for birth injury and women's health more broadly. In July 2020, the Australasian Birth Trauma Association posted side-by-side images on their social media page, one of Kim playing netball and one of her holding her baby, questioning why one woman's treatment was funded while the other was not. Why are this person's injuries treated so differently to this person's injuries? She asked. Hint, they're both me. Birth injuries, physical and psychological, get hidden under clothes, under messages of congratulations, under things-to-do lists, under well-meaning, aren't you lucky to have a beautiful baby with a labour like that type remarks. This major public health problem is labelled as a personal one, and Mama is left to figure it out alone. In her essay, Vagina, Tegan Bennett Daylight tells readers that it is imperative for both literary pages and the people who read them to know the details of women's embodied experiences. She asks us to look beyond throwaway terms like suffering to share the details of our stories, not just the highlight reel of motherhood. I will now share with you my details and how I hid them. Skim past the next few paragraphs if you're feeling a little squeamish. I experienced a labial tear during my daughter's birth. As she crowned, I could feel it would go on the next big push. I pulled short of committing to this on one contraction, and in the few seconds before the next one came, mustered the courage to seal the deal. Later, after my friend's teenage son asked why the birth pool water was so red in our photos, I edited my favourite one to black and white before sharing it broadly. Without meaning to, I had made my injury invisible in the photo I shared with the world. The short-term consequence of that labial tear was that I was stitched up with a catheter in place, a guide marker so the midwives wouldn't accidentally stitch my urethra closed and render me unable to urinate. Thanks to the combination of the catheter, pregnancy and birth, I was unable to lift my newborn standing up or walk holding her for many days without wetting myself. A few days post-birth, I was mid-conversation with my mum, standing in the hallway of my home when I realised I wouldn't make it to the toilet. We both watched as I drenched my pyjama pants and filled my Ugg boots with wee. The long-term consequence was a pelvic floor that was too tight and made sex painful, but that is a whole different story. The silence and stigma around incontinence leaves many women unaware of what's normal and what's not when it comes to post-birth waterworks. The official statistic from the Continence Foundation of Australia is that 1 in 3 women who have ever had a baby wet themselves. The pelvic floor physiotherapists I speak with speculate that the actual rate is likely to be much higher than reported. A high percentage of women, they suggest, are either not active enough to test out their pelvic floor strength with exercise or curtail their activities to avoid leaks, and can therefore answer none when asked about incontinence symptoms on health screening questionnaires. Whereas a course of pelvic floor physiotherapy post-birth is standard in France, public funding across the English-speaking world is scarce. It's more pleasant for the establishment to have women buy pads forever and count that in expenditure in our country's economic profile than it is to have men blush while discussing the policy updates that would enable women to receive the treatment they need to regain bladder and bowel control after pregnancy. As with the bodily pains of motherhood, the on-the-ground work of mothers has either been locked away from sight or normalised to the point of invisibility. Indeed, unless you are a mother yourself or have been a primary caregiver firsthand, it can be hard to conceptualise or imagine the depth and dynamic nature of mothering work. Much of a mother's work is unseen by way of being literally inside the home, tucked away from the eyes of the outside world. It is a sad fact of the separate, segregated nature of Western motherhood that for many mothers the first baby they hold or have any major role in caring for is their own. On a practical level, the work of a mother with young children often consists of the same time-consuming, repetitive tasks that can never be permanently ticked off a list. In an individualistic society based on production and earning, it is hard to see value in your own work when your day has consisted of 8 nappy changes, 7 breastfeeds, 3 sets of clothes, for both of you, getting the baby to take 2 naps, a few children's books and songs, and a load of laundry that is still sitting wet in the washing machine. The mental effort of coordinating these tasks and engaging in endless emotional responsivity isn't something that an onlooker could necessarily gauge either, but is arguably just as taxing as the provision of physical care. What did I even get done today? Is the general despairing question, with the unseen and unspoken answer of, I kept myself and the baby alive, hovering a little way off behind a curtain of shame. I am well attuned to how these things play out in private, but what really drives home that I have become invisible to the outside world is when I notice men doing things with their children in public. This becomes particularly irritating when they are being praised for it. Surely I am not the only one who feels infuriated when their partner gets comments like, "Isn't it lovely to see dads and their kids together?" Why is it that a man providing care rather than just doing fun shit on the weekends is still an aberration rather than an expectation? When we went to swimming lessons, the token dad stood out like a sore thumb. Because he and the man with his child at the park on a weekday are the exception to the rule, it implies that my work is assumed. Somehow my mothering, done ad nauseum, is not as praiseworthy as his carefree excursion, the one that I have probably worked to get the timing of feeds and naps perfectly aligned just so I can get a 2-hour block of time not being touched. After the first round of coronavirus restrictions eased in our area, we went to a local pub for dinner, with an unfenced grassy area between it and a busy road. Kids from various families played there, and I shadowed my road-oblivious daughter for safety. The security guard came by many times without a word until my husband and I switched over so I could eat. Sorry to burst your bubble, mate. COVID rules say you'll have to sit down. The kids can run around, but not you, the male guard told him. I am the default carer. My husband was noticeable, and a man who had allowed a woman to parent in plain sight stopped him actively parenting. Needless to say, we didn't stay much longer and haven't returned since. When I travelled by train to the student-led global climate strike, the older ladies to our right commented on how great it was to see dads out and about with their kids. I heard them passing the usual remarks about, "Must be mum's day off," and felt myself bristle with irritation. From the dad's conversation to our left, I could hear that as full-time staff they had taken a day's paid leave, but the mothers worked casual rosters and couldn't take a day off for wage loss or fear of employer retribution. When it came to my own experience of returning to part-time work in a local hospital, it was a mixed bag. During the first week back on shift, I felt like I was a secret agent, making paid employment and mothering work to my advantage. I was productive, great with my patients, flying under the radar, working efficiently to get out on the stroke of knock-off time. On reflection, I wasn't stealthy at all, but unwittingly colluding to make my status as a mother invisible in the workplace. My boss had assured me there would be a private room to express breast milk for my child. This would happen in my lunch break, separating me doing my unpaid mothering work from my colleagues. The irony of my private pumping room being used by high-up staff members receiving massages during the time of rapidly increasing social distancing regulations was not lost on me. As I sat on the cold floor of someone else's office attached to an electronic pump, I realised that my old self had choices that my new one as a mother didn't have. Any chance of socialising at meal break, feeling part of a team, or going for a walk in the sunshine had gone out the window. It is a feature of modern patriarchal motherhood that mothering work is a private act and a personal responsibility, separate from workplace and political life. You should be grateful for what you're given, says the patriarchy. Asking for a better deal is being greedy. This could not be further from the truth, as every act of mothering is a political act that has public ramifications. Infant feeding is a prime example of a politically and economically loaded mothering practice. Women are routinely told that breast milk is free, This is only true if women's time isn't valued and if breast milk isn't included in gross domestic product, GDP, and economic contribution index, which it isn't. More on that later. Mothers are also told over and over again that breast milk is hugely beneficial to their babies, yet making this happen is only achievable if women are given support to breastfeed, which relies on mother's time and breast milk being valued. Talk about a catch-22. To embrace motherhood as the political act that it is flies in the face of the social undercurrent that tells mothers, you made your bed, so you lie in it. The ways mothers who have careers in public office are treated provides perhaps the most obvious example of just how uncomfortable the powers that be are with bringing the realities of mothering out from behind closed doors and into the public arena. In September 2018, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern took her baby, whom she birthed during her term as PM, to a meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. She was asked by a journalist if having her baby and partner with her during her address made her distracted from her work. In June of the same year, Canadian MP Karina Gould responded to praise and contempt heaped on her for feeding her baby in the parliamentary chamber with a casual tweet, "Baby's gotta eat, and I had votes." In May 2017, Larissa Waters made headlines when she became the first person to breastfeed their baby in the Australian Senate, for which she was widely applauded but also accused of being unprofessional and attention-seeking. Conversely, few voters batted an eyelid when Australia's PM Scott Morrison and Deputy PM Josh Frydenberg said they managed working for many months of the year away from their children by video calling them, with the unsaid implication that their wives did everything else required. Clearly, the invisible, unspoken undercurrent of what it means to mother a child, i.e. to nurture and raise, compared to father a child, i.e. to provide sperm for conception, means that parenting is not a uniform experience. Motherhood and fatherhood are socially shaped experiences that occur on very different trajectories, and the ways we display this publicly are even more distinct. In From Here to Maternity, Professor Anne Oakley writes, "I was delivered of my identity at the same time as my baby, prevented from being the central figure in the drama of my life. While I rail against the idea of myself and other women being deleteriously referred to as just the baby's mum, the idea that I am indeed just my daughter's mum can sometimes feel protective. When I am introduced as my daughter's mum, the focus lies oblique to me. I become the secondary participant and don't have to give much away about my aspirations or jobs or beliefs in spaces where I don't feel compelled to explain them. Being a mum can provide almost an invisibility cloak to my hopes and dreams, at the same time as being social lubricant to talk superficially with others. Unfortunately, any perceived protection that the just a mum badge earns me is undercut by its dangers, both to my child and to myself. As discussed earlier, if we are dismissed by the "what would she know" attitude of some medical professionals and copied on the chin, our children's health may be at risk. The protective pushing down of the aspirations I'd rather not discuss with strangers does little good long-term either. How can I tell my daughter her hopes, ambitions, and desires are important if I'm hell-bent on hiding mine? Marianne Williamson writes that it is not our darkness that we are most frightened by, but the light of our own potential. Williamson suggests that when we give ourselves permission to live vibrantly, letting all our talent and passion run free, we extend an unspoken invitation for other mothers and all our collective children to do the same. I am in the privileged position that I currently feel safe, both physically and emotionally, to let my light shine and bring this book to life. There are whole groups of women and people who do mothering work who are missing from the public sphere and might feel that it is impossible or even dangerous to reveal their true selves, let alone unleash their brilliance. As of 2015, it was estimated that 15% of Australian children had at least one parent with a disability, yet I can't think of a single portrayal of a mother with disability in the media. Trans parents are completely missing from public conversation. Two-mum families continue to be stigmatised or treated as a curiosity. Stepmothers are either disregarded or stereotyped as Cinderella-style villains. Adoptive mothers are painted as saints, while birth mothers whose children are adopted by another are portrayed in the opposite light. Mothers experiencing family violence are invisible too, and the political silence around their protection is both deafening and disgusting. In Australia, during 2020, 90% of all women and 65% of all children and teens who were victims of alleged murder or manslaughter died as a result of relationship violence. While the provision of maternity care for the general population is far from perfect, birth and health outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mums and their babies are far worse. Couple this with disproportionate rates of child removal and out-of-home care for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, and we can see that the stolen generations are not a historical artefact, but a current reality in modern-day Australia. Chronic underfunding, racism, and paternalistic bureaucracy have much to answer for. United States former Supreme Court Justice Louis D. Brandeis wrote that sunlight was the best of disinfectants. While his comments were in relation to transparency in the banking industry, I believe his sentiment rings true in regards to bringing the unseen work of mothering and unseen mothers themselves into the public consciousness. The more we talk about the breadth of our birthing experiences, the more we can agitate for gold standard, fully funded, culturally appropriate, and mother-directed maternity and postpartum care. The more we showcase the meaningful work that we do, the more we shake the foundations of the systems that rely on our labour without properly valuing it. And the more we step into our own light, the more we make it safe for others less privileged than ourselves to blaze their own trail too. Mothers and their backstage contribution to the performance of society have been invisible for too long. This is our curtain call. It's time to step onto the stage and into the spotlight. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star review and share with anyone you feel may benefit from this content. If you'd like to continue the conversation, join me on social media at Anna Cusack Postpartum and head to my website www.annacusack.com.au to check out the ways we can work together. Please use the contact form on the website to inquire about having me run workshops with your client groups or book me for corporate speaking or professional development presentations. See you next episode.